Welcome to Fluent Harbor. Today, we are going to tell you a very special story. It is a story about a girl named Victoria. She was a small girl with a very big destiny. She became a queen when she was only 18 years old. But her life was not always easy. It was full of secrets, strict rules, and a very brave heart. Let us go back in time together. Our story begins on a bright morning in May, in the year 1819. A tiny baby girl was born in a giant palace called Kensington. Her name was Alexandrina Victoria. At first, no one thought she would ever be a queen. She was fifth in line for the throne. But as the years went by, the people ahead of her passed away. One by one, they were gone. Fate was choosing her. This quiet, little child was going to rule a massive empire. But inside the palace, Victoria was not happy. She felt like a bird in a cage. Her mother and a man named Sir John Conroy were very, very strict. They did not want her to be free. They made a list of hard rules called the Kensington system. These rules were meant to keep her weak. Victoria was never allowed to be alone. She could not even walk down the stairs without a person holding her hand. She had to sleep in the same room as her mother every single night. She had no friends her own age. She only had her dolls and her loyal dogs to play with. It was a very lonely world. But Victoria was very smart. She spent her time reading books, painting, and writing in a secret diary. She was watching everything. She was learning how to be strong in her heart. One day, when she was only 8 years old, her teacher showed her a picture of her family tree. Victoria looked at the names and realized something amazing. One day, she would be the queen. She did not cry. She did not get scared. She looked at her teacher and said, "I will be good." It was a promise. She wanted to be a leader who was kind, honest, and full of love. The years passed. Victoria grew up and learned many languages, like French and German. Then, on a very quiet morning in June 1837, a man came to her room and bowed. He said, "Your Majesty, the king is dead." At only 18 years old, Victoria was now the queen. Powerful men came to see her. They thought she would be a weak girl they could boss around. But Victoria stood up tall. She looked them in the eye and spoke with a calm, strong voice. She moved her bed out of her mother's room that very day. She was finally, truly free. The little girl in the cage was gone. A brave new queen had arrived to write her own story. Being the queen of a huge empire was a very big job for an 18-year-old girl. She had to make every single decision, all by herself. She had to sign many papers and talk to many important men every day. She had no father to help her, and she had no brothers or sisters to talk to. Even though she was finally free from her mother's strict rules, she was still alone in her heart. The big, cold rooms of Buckingham Palace felt very quiet at night. She needed someone to stand by her side. She needed a friend she could trust with all her secrets. Then she remembered a young man from her past. When Victoria was only 16 years old, her cousin Albert came to visit her at the palace. Albert was a prince from Germany. He was not like the other men in the palace. He was very kind, very quiet, and very, very smart. They spent many happy days together during that first visit. Albert played beautiful music on the piano, and Victoria loved to sit and listen to him play. They laughed, and they talked about their dreams for the future. For the first time in her life, Victoria felt seen. She felt like she could truly be herself around him. But then he had to go back home to Germany. Victoria was very sad to see him go, but she never forgot his gentle face or his kind words. She kept the memory of him deep inside her heart. In the year 1839, a special letter arrived for the young queen. It was from her uncle Leopold. He asked if Albert could come to visit London once again. When Victoria read the letter, her heart skipped a beat. She remembered Albert's soft eyes and his thoughtful spirit. She told her uncle that she was ready for him to come back. On the night before Albert arrived, Victoria could not sleep. She was nervous, and she was very excited. She wondered if he would still be the same kind boy she remembered. She wondered if he would like the new queen. On October 10th, 1839, Prince Albert finally walked into Buckingham Palace. The moment Victoria saw him, something magical happened. He was even more handsome and kind than she remembered. She wrote in her diary that it was love at first sight. In those days, things were very different for a queen. Usually, a man asks a woman to marry him, but because Victoria was the queen, Albert was not allowed to ask her. It was against the rules of the palace. Only the queen herself was allowed to propose. Victoria did not wait. She was a very brave woman. She invited Albert to a private room and told him how she felt. She asked him if he would marry her and stay by her side forever. Albert looked at her with love and said yes. He loved her just as much as she loved him. Victoria was so happy that she wrote about it in her diary right away. She called him her dearest, dear Albert. For the first time in her life, she was not just a queen. She was a woman in love. Her lonely days were finally coming to an end. The wedding took place on a rainy day in February. It was the year 1840. Even though the sky was gray, the heart of the queen was full of sunshine. She was so happy. Victoria did something very special on her wedding day. Usually, royal brides wore heavy dresses made of gold and silver, but Victoria chose something different. She chose a simple, beautiful white dress. She wanted to look like a woman in love, not just a queen. Because of her, many brides today still wear white on their big day. The ceremony was held at a place called the Chapel Royal. When Victoria walked down the aisle, she was shaking with excitement. She felt like her heart was flying. She looked at Albert, and she knew she was making the right choice. They promised to love and care for each other for the rest of their lives. It was a very sweet moment. After the wedding, life at the palace changed. Victoria was no longer alone in her big office. Now there were two desks sitting side by side. Albert was a very hard worker. He wanted to help Victoria rule the empire. At first, it was a little bit difficult for them. Victoria was the queen, and she liked to be the boss. She was used to making all the decisions by herself. She was a very strong-willed woman. Sometimes they had small arguments, but Albert was very patient and very kind. He showed her that two heads are better than one. He helped her read important letters. He gave her good advice about the people and the laws. He became her secret partner. They were not just a married couple. They were a team. They were partners in everything they did. Victoria began to trust Albert more than anyone else in the world. She saw how much he cared about the poor people in the country. Albert wanted to make the world a better place. He wanted to use science to help everyone. Victoria loved his big heart. Soon, their family began to grow. Their first baby was a girl, and they named her Victoria. They were so proud. Then they had a boy named Albert Edward. The palace was no longer a quiet, cold place. It was now full of the sounds of children playing and laughing. Victoria was very happy. She had a husband she loved and children she adored. She felt like the luckiest woman in the world. But being a mother and a queen was not easy. She had many duties to perform. She had to meet with leaders and travel to faraway places. Albert was always there to support her. He held her hand when she was tired. He gave her strength when she felt weak. He was her rock. Together, they were changing the way people looked at the royal family. They wanted to show that a family could be full of love and respect. They spent their evenings playing music or drawing together. It was a beautiful time in their lives. The golden years had truly begun for them. But as we know, life always has surprises. Some are happy and some are very sad. But for now, Victoria and Albert were the happiest team in the world. They were ready to face anything as long as they were together. Imagine a house filled with the sounds of running feet and happy laughter. Victoria and Albert did not just have one or two children. They had 9. They had 4 boys and 5 girls. The palace was no longer a quiet place for old men in suits. It was a home. It was a place for birthdays, Christmas trees, and family games. Victoria loved her children very much, but sometimes she found them to be a bit loud. She was a very busy queen, and Albert was a very busy prince. They decided they needed a place to escape the noisy city of London. They wanted a place where they could just be a normal family. They bought a beautiful house on a small island called the Isle of Wight. It was called Osborne House. There, the children could play in the sand and run in the green grass. Albert even built a small cottage for the children to play in. He wanted them to learn how to cook and how to grow vegetables in the garden. He wanted them to be smart and kind. While the children were playing, Albert was thinking of a very big idea. He wanted to show the whole world how much life was changing. He wanted to show off new inventions and beautiful art. In the year 1851, Albert created something called the Great Exhibition. It was like a giant world fair, but there was one problem. Where could they put all the amazing things from around the world? Albert had a dream. He wanted to build a giant building made entirely of glass and iron. People thought he was crazy. They said, a glass building will break, or it will be too hot inside. But Albert did not listen to the people who said no. He worked very, very hard. He stayed up late at night looking at maps and drawings. He wanted everything to be perfect for Victoria. Finally, the building was finished. It was called the Crystal Palace. It was so big that even giant trees could fit inside it. It sparkled under the sun like a massive diamond. When the doors opened, millions of people came from all over the world. They saw the first voting machines, giant clocks, and even a diamond that was the size of a bird's egg. Victoria was so proud of her Albert. She walked through the glass palace and felt like she was in a fairy tale. She wrote that it was the greatest day in the history of the country. The world was changing. There were new trains, new machines, and new ways to communicate. Victoria and Albert were leading the way into a bright new future. They were the most famous couple in the world. People looked at them and saw a family that loved each other. They saw a queen who listened to her husband and a prince who served his queen. These were the golden years. The sun seemed to shine brighter and the music sounded sweeter. Victoria felt like nothing could ever go wrong. She had her 9 children. She had her glass palace, and most importantly, she had her Albert. She thought this happiness would last forever. But as we will see in our next part, the sky can turn dark very quickly, even for a queen, even for a woman who has everything. For 21 years, Victoria and Albert were inseparable. They were like two halves of a single soul. They worked together. They laughed together. They raised 9 children together. Victoria trusted Albert more than anyone else in the whole world. He was her teacher. He was her best friend. He was her light in the dark. But in late 1861, that light began to flicker. Albert had been working much too hard for a very long time. He was helping Victoria with many big problems in the country. He was also very worried about their oldest son, Bertie. He was tired and his body was becoming very weak. He began to feel a terrible, cold chill. He had a high fever that would not go away. The doctors came and went, looking very worried. They realized he had caught a dangerous sickness called typhoid fever. Victoria stayed right by his side, night and day. And she could not sleep, she could not eat, she just watched him breathe. She prayed to God to save her dearest, perfect Albert. She held his hand so tight. On the night of December 14th, the palace was very, very quiet. The wind was blowing outside, but inside, everyone was holding their breath. Victoria sat on the edge of the bed. She held Albert's hand as it grew cold. She leaned in close to his ear. She whispered, "It is your little wife." He smiled a tiny bit, and then he was gone. In that moment, a loud cry broke the silence of the palace. It was a sound of pure pain. Victoria's heart had broken into 1,000 pieces. She felt like her life was over too. She wrote in her diary that her happy life was ended. She was only 42 years old. She was still a young woman, but she felt like her soul had left her. The whole country went into mourning. Black flags were hung from all the buildings. People cried in the streets because they knew the queen was suffering. But no one knew just how deep her sadness truly was. Victoria made a very big decision that night. She decided she would never wear bright colors again. From that day on, for the rest of her long life, she only wore black. She wanted the world to know that she was a widow. She wanted to show that her heart belonged to Albert. She became known as the Widow of Windsor. She moved away from the busy city. She did not want to go to parties. She did not want to see many people. She wanted to be alone with her memories. In Albert's room, she ordered that everything stay exactly the same. His clothes were laid out every single morning. His hot water was brought to his basin. It was as if she was waiting for him to walk through the door. She wore a small locket around her neck with his hair inside. Every letter she wrote was on paper with a thick black border. She felt that if she stopped being sad, she would be forgetting him, and she never wanted to forget. She had many statues built of him all over the country. She wanted him to be remembered as a hero, a man who changed the world for the better. But most of all, she just wanted him back. She felt like a bird that had lost its wings. She was still a queen, but she was a queen living in the dark. This was the beginning of the long night for Victoria, a time of silence that would last for many, many years. After Albert died, the world changed for her. The bright lights of the palace felt too sharp. The music felt too loud. She decided to hide away from the world. For many, many years, the people of England did not see their queen. She became like a ghost in her own home. She stayed in her castles, far away from the busy streets of London. She went to Osborne House by the sea, and she went to Balmoral in the cold mountains of Scotland. She was still the queen on the postage stamps. Her face was still on every penny in people's pockets, but her actual face was never seen in public. The people began to feel forgotten. They started to ask, why do we have a queen if she never comes out? Some people even grew angry. They thought she was being selfish with her sadness, but Victoria was not being selfish. She was simply broken. She felt that without Albert, she did not know how to be a queen anymore. She felt like a ship lost at sea without a map. She needed someone to help her find the shore. Then in the quiet mountains of Scotland, she found a new kind of friend. His name was John Brown. He was not a prince or a powerful leader. He was a simple man who looked after the horses. John Brown was very different from the men in the palace. He did not bow low or use fancy words. He spoke to Victoria in a very plain and honest way. He even told her when she was being difficult. At first, the people in the palace were shocked. They thought he was very rude, but Victoria loved his honesty. She felt that most people only told her what they thought a queen wanted to hear. John Brown told her the truth. He encouraged her to go outside. He made her walk in the fresh, cold air of the Highlands. He sat with her and listened to her talk about her husband. Slowly, because of this simple friendship, the queen began to feel a little bit stronger. She started to take an interest in the world again. She started to read the newspapers and talk about the laws. However, this friendship caused a big scandal. People in London started to tell mean stories. They even gave her a nickname. They called her Mrs. Brown. They thought it was wrong for a queen to be so close to a servant. But Victoria did not care what the gossips said. She knew that John Brown was her loyal friend. He was the one who helped her stand up when she felt like falling down. She was still wearing her black clothes. She was still missing Albert every single second of every single day. But she was no longer hiding in a dark room with the curtains closed. She realized that her empire was growing very fast. There were new countries, new people, and new problems to solve. She was the mother of a giant family of nations. She knew she could not stay invisible forever. The world was calling her name. She had to decide if she was ready to step back into the light, even if she had to walk alone. It would take more time, but the invisible queen was starting to fade away. A new, stronger Victoria was beginning to grow in her place. Now the world was changing faster than ever before. It was the middle of the 1870s. The British Empire was growing and growing. It was so big that people used to say, "The sun never sets on the British Empire." This meant that somewhere in the world, it was always daytime in a land ruled by Victoria. She was no longer just the queen of a small island. She was the leader of people in Canada, Australia, Africa, and many other places. But there was one place that Victoria found very special. That place was India. Victoria had never visited India. It was a very long trip by boat in those days, but she was very curious about the people who lived there. She loved to read about their history and their beautiful clothes. In the year 1876, the government gave Victoria a new title. She was now the Empress of India. This was a very proud moment for her. She felt like the mother of a giant, global family. She wanted to learn more about this faraway land. She even started to learn a new language called Hindustani. Even though she was getting older, she never stopped wanting to learn new things. But while the Queen was becoming more powerful, life in England was also changing. There were giant factories being built. There were new trains that could travel very fast across the country. Because of these inventions, people could now buy newspapers every day. They wanted to know what their queen was doing. They wanted to see her. They wanted to celebrate her. Victoria realized that she could not stay hidden in her castles anymore. She had to show herself to her people. She started to travel back to London more often. She began to open new buildings and visit schools. When people saw her carriage passing by, they would cheer and wave their hats. They were happy to see their old Vic back in the city. She still wore her black dress and her white widow's cap. She still missed Albert every day, but she started to smile a little bit more. She began to host big dinners and meet with famous leaders from around the world. She was a very tiny woman. She was only 5 feet tall, but when she walked into a room, everyone became very quiet. She had a voice that was clear and strong. She didn't need a tall crown to look like a leader. She had a look in her eyes that said, "I am the queen and I am in charge." She was becoming a symbol of the whole age. The years were passing quickly now. Her children were all grown up. They were getting married to princes and princesses all across Europe. Because of this, Victoria became known as the grandmother of Europe. She had grandchildren in almost every royal palace on the continent. She wrote letters to all of them every single week. She was the glue that held the big royal family together. She was also the glue that held the empire together. She had survived the darkness of her past. Now she was standing in the light of a new era. But there were still many years left in her story. There were more surprises waiting for her and more lessons for her to learn. Imagine the year is now 1887. The city of London was decorated with bright, colorful flags. The streets were filled with the sound of music and cheering. Why was everyone so happy? Because it was the Golden Jubilee. This meant Victoria had been the queen for 50 long years. 50 years is a very, very long time. Most of the people living in England had never known any other leader. To them, she was more than just a queen. She was like a grandmother to the whole nation. During the big celebration, kings and princes from all over the world came to bow before her. Victoria sat in her golden carriage, and she looked out at the crowds. She felt very proud, but she also felt a little bit tired. She was now 68 years old. Her hair was white, and she walked with a cane, but her mind was still as sharp as a needle. She still wanted to learn about the world beyond her palace walls. During the Jubilee dinner, two tall men from India arrived to serve the queen. One of them was a young man named Abdul Karim. He had dark eyes and a very kind smile. Victoria was immediately interested in him. She asked him many questions about his home in India. She wanted to know about the food, the weather, and the beautiful buildings. Abdul told her stories that she had never heard before. He spoke about the spicy smells of the markets and the bright colors of the flowers. Victoria was so happy to listen to him. She decided to give Abdul a very special job. She did not want him to be a servant anymore. She wanted him to be her teacher. She called him her munshi, which is a word for teacher. Every single day, the queen and the munshi would sit together. He taught her how to write in a beautiful language called Urdu. She practiced her letters just like a young schoolgirl. She loved to learn. Abdul also told her about his religion and his family. For the first time in a long time, Victoria felt like she had a true friend who didn't care about her crown. He even cooked a special dish for her called curry. Victoria loved the spicy taste. It was something brand new and exciting for her. But just like before, the people in the palace were not happy. They were jealous of the young man from India. They thought it was wrong for the queen to be friends with him. The royal staff and the government men tried to make Abdul leave. They told the queen mean stories about him. They hoped she would get angry and send him away. But they forgot one very important thing. Victoria was the queen, and she was a very stubborn woman. She stood up for her friend, just like she had stood up for John Brown many years ago. She told the powerful men, "I am the queen, and I will choose my own friends." She would not let anyone tell her who she could talk to. She was loyal to those who were kind to her. Abdul stayed by her side for the rest of her life. He gave her a reason to keep learning and to keep smiling. He showed her that friendship has no borders and no rules. Even in her old age, Victoria was proving that she had a big, open heart. She was the empress of a giant world, but she was never too big to learn from a friend. As the sun began to set on the 19th century, the world was preparing for a new age. And Victoria, the tiny woman in black, was still the heart of it all. The years were flying by like birds in the sky. It was now the year 1897. Victoria had been sitting on the throne for 60 years. This was called the Diamond Jubilee. It was an even bigger party than the one before. People from every corner of the earth came to London to say thank you to their queen. Victoria was now a very old lady. She could not walk very well, and her eyes were tired. But when she looked out at the millions of people cheering her name, she felt a great warmth in her heart. She sent a special message to all the people in her empire. She used a new invention called the telegraph. Her message was simple. She said, "From my heart, I thank my beloved people. May God bless them." Think about how much the world had changed since she was a little girl. When Victoria was born, people traveled in carriages pulled by horses. There were no light bulbs. There were no telephones. But by the time of her Diamond Jubilee, the world was full of wonders. There were giant steamships that could cross the ocean. There were trains that roared through the countryside. There were even early versions of moving pictures. Victoria had seen the world grow up. She had seen cities get bigger and schools get better. She was the face of progress. Even though she was the most powerful woman in the world, she was still a very simple person. She loved her tea. She loved her dogs. And most of all, she still loved her memories of Albert. She had outlived many of her friends. She had outlived some of her children. The world around her was moving very fast, but Victoria remained steady. She was the one thing that never changed. She was the great-grandmother of the world. Even people who lived thousands of miles away felt like they knew her. Her face was on the money they used to buy bread. Her name was on the hospitals and the parks. She worked until the very end. She still read every paper the government sent to her. She still signed every important document. She never stopped doing her duty. Victoria was tired, but she was satisfied. She had kept her promise that she made when she was a little girl. "Do you remember?" She said, "I will be good," and she was. She had led her people through times of war and times of peace. She had shown the world that a woman could be a strong and fair leader. She was the light that guided the path into the new century. The 1800s were coming to an end. A new era was starting. Victoria was the bridge between the old world and the new world, but every story must have a final chapter. The year was 1901. A brand new century had just started. The world was full of hope and new ideas, but inside the walls of Osborne House, on the quiet Isle of Wight, the air was very still. Queen Victoria was 81 years old. She was tired. Her body was weak, and her eyes could no longer see the beautiful flowers in her garden. She knew that her long journey was coming to an end. She was surrounded by her family. Her children and grandchildren came from many different countries to be near her. They sat by her bed and held her hands. Even in her final moments, Victoria was thinking of her dearest Albert. She had kept his memory alive for 40 years. She had worn black every single day to honor him. Now she was ready to see him again. She felt like a traveler who had been on a very long trip and was finally seeing the lights of home. She was not afraid. She was at peace. On January 22nd, 1901, the grandmother of Europe took her very last breath. The news spread across the world like a great wave. In London, in New York, in India, and in Australia, people stopped what they were doing. The world felt different. It felt like a giant mountain had suddenly disappeared. For most people, a world without Victoria was impossible to imagine. She had been their queen for 63 years. But Victoria had left one final surprise for everyone. She had written secret instructions for her funeral many years before. She did not want a dark and sad goodbye. She had spent 40 years wearing black, but for her funeral, she wanted everything to be white. She wanted a white funeral to symbolize hope and a new beginning. She asked for white horses to pull her carriage. She wanted white flowers everywhere. And most importantly, she asked to be buried in her white wedding veil. She wanted to go to Albert not as a sad widow, but as the happy bride he had married so long ago. She wanted to be remembered for the love that had guided her life. As her coffin passed through the streets of London, millions of people stood in total silence. There was no cheering. There was only the sound of horses' hooves and the quiet crying of the people. They were saying goodbye to an era. The Victorian age was over, but Victoria's spirit was not gone. She was buried right next to Albert in a beautiful building called a mausoleum. Above the door she had carved these words, "Farewell, best beloved, here at last I shall rest with thee." They were finally together again. The two desks were side by side once more. The little girl who was once locked in a golden cage was now free. She had become the greatest queen the world had ever seen. But the story of her impact on our lives is not over yet. Though she is gone, the world we live in today still carries her footprints. When you look at a map, or walk through a big city, or even when you celebrate Christmas, you are seeing her influence. Before Victoria, Christmas was a very quiet holiday, but because of her and Albert, we now have Christmas trees, beautiful cards, and big family dinners. She helped make the world feel a little more like a home. But her greatest legacy is not in the things we can touch. It is in the story of her life. Her life was a journey of a woman who refused to be small. And she was born into a world of fear and strict rules. She was raised in silence and kept in a cage. She was given a giant crown when she was just a teenager. And she loved with her whole heart, and she lost that love far too soon. She cried. She hid from the world. She struggled with her sadness for many years. But she did not stay down. She came back. She stood up tall. She ruled the biggest empire in history. She did not rule because she was perfect. No, she ruled because she was real. She made mistakes. She felt lonely. She had a temper, but she never stopped trying to be good. She showed us that you can be a mother, a widow, a survivor, and a leader, all at the same time. Her voice still echoes today. It tells us that it does not matter how small or lonely you feel. You can start with nothing and build a life that people will remember forever. You can lose your heart to sadness and still lead with your soul. You can feel forgotten by the world and still find a way to make history. Victoria proved that even a quiet, lonely girl can change the destiny of millions. Her story is now over, but your story is just beginning. If you are learning English today, remember Victoria. She had to learn many languages too. She had to learn how to speak with confidence, and so can you. It's every word you learn and every story you hear makes you stronger. You are building your own empire of knowledge, one step at a time. We hope this story of love, power, and strength has moved your heart. We hope it has helped you understand that you are capable of great things. Thank you for joining us here at Fluent Harbor. It has been a joy to share this history with you. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe and stay with us for more stories. We believe that learning a language is the best way to open your heart to the world. Remember, you don't need a crown to be a queen or a king. You only need a brave heart and the will to keep going. Thank you for watching, thank you for learning, and remember, you are unforgettable. Goodbye for now.